The story begins with silence. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of something that watches. Imagine the wind caught between the trees of a forest that has swallowed men whole, a place the earth itself seems to despise. They say in 1855, a group of 110 loggers marched into the endless green of Michigan's northern wilderness, their boots cutting deep into soil that had never known industry, never known iron teeth gnawing at its ancient heartwood. 10 weeks later, only 10 of them stumbled out. The others had vanished without graves, without screams heard, without records. And what those 10 men whispered in their final days, what they confessed before being silenced, was so strange, so disturbing, that the documents were buried in archives the public was never meant to see. But tonight I'm going to drag them back into the light. You may regret listening, but you will never forget it. At first, the story was passed off as another tragedy of the frontier. Men got lost. Men froze. Wolves fed. That was the explanation that soothed the polite citizens of the East. But in the logbooks, hidden in margins and coded phrases, there are traces of something darker. The captain of the crew, Elias Dorn, noted strange patterns burned into tree trunks long before the axes ever touched bark. Circles within circles, spirals, intersecting symbols too complex for backwoods graffiti. One entry, dated November 6th, reads, "The forest resists us. It watches. Trees fall in the night though no axe strikes them." The men whisper of chants carried on the wind, of eyes between the branches. Within days, men began to vanish. Not in groups, not in bloody accidents, but one at a time. No bodies. Just gone. The first was a young boy, barely 17, who was last seen standing in a circle of frost that should not have been there. This is where the story begins to bend. For when the survivors were finally pulled from the wilderness, half mad and starved, they described things that no tribunal wanted to hear. They claimed the forest itself was a cathedral, a structure alive, built not of stone but of flesh disguised as bark. And at its heart, an altar. A black hollow beneath a giant cedar, large enough to swallow men whole. They spoke of hearing voices that promised riches for blood, that demanded offerings in exchange for safe passage. And here's where it twists. The ones who refused to sacrifice were the first to vanish. The forest devoured its disobedient. It did not kill them, it claimed them. But what disturbed investigators most was not what the men described. It was how they all described the exact same thing, down to the smallest detail, as if rehearsed by some invisible choir. Buried within state records, there's a letter written by a local magistrate who interviewed 2 of the last survivors before they both disappeared from their hospital beds. The letter was never meant for public eyes. It reads, "They are not mad. They are marked. There is a power older than the republic that dwells in those woods. Something that thrives on the cutting of trees, the spilling of sweat, the breaking of backs. These men fed it and it grew. Those who lived are not free, they are bound. Their eyes reflect circles where pupils should be. They chant in their sleep. They dream of a throne of roots." Do you understand the weight of this? The forest was not merely hostile, it was organized. It fed not on flesh alone, but on devotion. And once men had given a taste of it, they belonged forever. But here's the question they don't want you asking. If this was simply a tragedy in a forest, why did the railroad companies and timber barons rush to buy the land immediately after? Why did they silence families of the lost loggers with payouts larger than the men's lives were ever worth? Why did they fence off sections of the forest, posting guards as if protecting a treasury? The truth becomes clear only when you follow the money. For every tree that fell, new wealth seemed to appear in the ledgers of men who never set foot in the woods. And the survivors, those 10 broken men, were all placed into positions of quiet influence across the state. School boards, town councils, banking committees, as if someone wanted them scattered, embedded like roots beneath the surface of ordinary life. Ask yourself, was this a haunting, or was it a recruitment? What if I told you that the forest was never random? That the logging camp was not simply an enterprise of profit but a ritual disguised as commerce? Think about it. 110 men sent to fell trees in an untouched expanse. No witnesses, no oversight, no church bells ringing in the distance. Just isolation. What better stage for an initiation? Because here's the buried truth, they weren't there only to cut wood. They were participants in something older, something encoded into the land long before America was even imagined. You see, native tribes warned settlers of the standing ones, not trees but entities that rooted themselves in time, not soil. The tribes avoided that forest, not out of superstition but memory. They knew what lived there. And so the barons who funded this camp weren't ignorant, they were obedient. They were feeding something ancient that had been waiting for blood under the disguise of lumber contracts. The men sent into those woods weren't employees. They were offerings. But the 10 who returned, broken, hollow-eyed, half-dead, are where the secret sharpens to a blade. Because they didn't escape. They were released. And every one of them, without exception, lived strangely charmed lives after. No major illnesses. Fortunes that never dwindled. Children who seemed preternaturally gifted. It was as if the forest had invested in them, planted something inside them that would yield power later. There are even letters from their descendants hinting at recurring dreams of the cedar mouth, a vast black hollow that breathes. Think about that. Generations later, the dreams persist. This isn't memory, it's inheritance. A curse disguised as a blessing, spreading outward through bloodlines, embedding influence into American life quietly, invisibly. These 10 men didn't bring back trauma. They brought back infection. And the question you must ask is not what happened in 1855, but what that forest is still growing right now. The state archives mention a curious order from the governor's office in 1856. All maps of the northern parcels are to be amended to exclude Camp D17 and its surrounding 50 square miles. Excluded. Erased. It became what the locals called the blind zone, a stretch of forest left unmarked as though it didn't exist. No railroads cut through it. No towns sprouted along its borders. Even surveyors, men tasked with measuring land down to the inch, avoided it entirely. And yet, profits continued to stream from timber companies as if the wood was still being harvested. Oh, who was doing the cutting? Men spoke of phantom camps, of sounds of saws in the night, yet no living worker was ever seen entering or leaving. The ledgers fattened, families of the barons expanded into dynasties. Tell me, does that sound like an industry or does it sound like a pact? Something unseen harvesting and men in suits taking their cut in silence? And now, a darker twist, because if this were merely a haunted patch of woods, it would be terrifying but containable. Yet records show shipments leaving that region not marked as lumber at all. Crates delivered to eastern ports labeled only with a single symbol, concentric rings, black ink burned into wood. What was inside them has been scrubbed from manifests, erased from newspapers, silenced by generations of silence. But fragments survive. A letter from a dock worker mentions logs that bled when split. A Chicago newspaper clipping, quickly pulled, described foreign objects of no botanical resemblance. And in one chilling report, a doctor claimed that a piece of timber from that camp, when carved, began to weep resin that hardened into something resembling teeth. Do you see where this leads? The survivors didn't just bring knowledge out of the woods. They brought artifacts. And those artifacts were distributed, hidden, sold, and perhaps even worshipped in the halls of power. If you are still here, if you are still listening, then you are not like most. Most click away, most dismiss this as fantasy, most retreat to safety. But not you. You feel that itch, don't you? That gnawing awareness that history has teeth and has been biting at your neck since the day you were born. What I am telling you is not simply a story, it is a mirror. Because the same techniques used in those woods are still being used now. Men are recruited with promises of wealth, cut off from the world, and reshaped through terror into tools of a power older than they can comprehend. It happened in 1855, it happened long before, and it happens now. And I will prove it. But first, I want you to claim your transformation. Write this phrase in the comments right now, twice, so it sears itself into your awareness. The forest remembers. Write it twice as your initiation into this forbidden knowledge. Because once you declare it, you cannot go back. History pretends to be a sequence of accidents, but patterns betray the lie. 11 years after the forgotten logging camp, during the height of the Civil War, military scouts reported vanishing units in wooded terrain along the Great Lakes. The reports were buried as desertions. But when you compare the descriptions, they echo the same nightmare from 1855. Soldiers marching into thickets, finding strange carvings on trees, then disappearing as if erased from existence. Their rifles remained. Their boots sat in the mud. The men themselves, gone. Some whispered that the forest consumed those who did not bend. And when you read the testimonies of the officers who survived, it is word for word the same pattern. Circles burned into bark, whispers at night, a hollow cedar that breathed. That's not coincidence. That's continuation. The forgotten logging camp wasn't a closed chapter. It was the first feeding ground in a cycle that still hasn't ended. Now here's where it sharpens into something that should make your blood run cold. Look at the family lines of the 10 men who returned. By the early 1900s, their descendants held seats in Michigan banks, in timber conglomerates, in local politics. By the mid-1900s, some of their bloodlines had climbed higher: state senators, federal judges, even industrialists tied to war contracts. The power multiplied with eerie precision, as if fertilized by something deeper than luck. And through it all, those families remained curiously bound to the same region. They never left. Always returning, always building on land near that same blind zone in the north. It was not just loyalty, it was tether. The forest had claimed them, and through them it began to claim institutions. Think about it. What if the forest's reach was not physical but political? What if, instead of roots gripping soil, it used men as roots, spreading control upward into the structures that govern your life right now? There's a psychological tactic at work here, one you've been subjected to your entire life without ever naming it. It is the art of selective erasure. First, you strip an event from maps. Then you bury reports in coded language. Next, you replace memory with a safer narrative. Men died in the woods. Soldiers deserted. It was wolves or storms or chance. That way, when fragments leak out, they can be dismissed as folklore, superstition, delusion. And once the masses accept the lie, the system grows in silence. That's exactly what happened with the logging camp. What should have been an unhealable wound in history was anesthetized into obscurity. You weren't meant to know about this. Your teachers weren't told. Your textbooks never mentioned it. Because the forest thrives in your ignorance. Power is strongest when it hides its roots. But tonight you are tearing away the soil. You are staring into what was meant to stay buried. And that changes you forever. Let me prove to you how deep this silence runs. In 1932, a professor at the University of Michigan attempted to publish a paper linking the survivors' accounts with indigenous legends of the Hollow One. Within days of submitting it, his department funding was cut, his office ransacked, and his career ended. The paper was never printed. But fragments remain in his personal notes, notes he smuggled out to a colleague. In them, he makes a chilling observation. What the tribes feared was not death, but assimilation. A swallowing into something rootless yet eternal. The standing ones do not kill. They incorporate. Men vanish, not into the grave, but into the living architecture of the forest. And here's the hook. The professor concluded with a warning. Those who return are not spared. They are extensions. Their authority in the human world is not their own. They carry the forest with them, shaping nations through unseen vines. Read that again. Nations shaped not by leaders, but by something older speaking through them. Pause for a moment and consider the ritual of recruitment. In the camp of 1855, men entered expecting wages, not initiation. One by one they were offered choices: submit or vanish. Those who vanished were not failures, they were food. Those who submitted were not heroes, they were vessels. Do you see the pattern? This same ritual plays out in our world constantly. Corporations recruit fresh blood. Governments draft the young. Secret orders filter ambitious men through silent tests. Some break. Some disappear. But a chosen few emerge rewarded, changed, embedded into systems that suddenly seem to favor them. This is not just a story of the past. It is a template. The forest was a theater for it, but the play continues everywhere. And now I want you to see yourself inside it. Ask, when you enter the halls of power, What stares back at you from the hollow cedar of today? Is it opportunity, or is it something watching, waiting, whispering the same words it whispered in 1855? Serve or vanish. The men who returned from the forest never spoke of what they had promised. They never wrote it openly, never admitted it in daylight. But patterns betray oaths better than words. One of them, Nathaniel Hale, lived in silence for decades. When he died in 1899, his family discovered an object locked in a cedar chest beneath his floorboards. It was a wooden mask carved with concentric rings spiraling into where the eyes should be, and written in a trembling hand on the inside, "The Hollow watches through me." That mask was seized by state officials, never to be seen again. But whispers of it lingered in university vaults, and even now, you can find rumors of its existence in obscure collections labeled anomalous ethnography. Ask yourself, why would a simple logger, a man of no learning or wealth, craft such a thing? Unless it wasn't his craft at all. Unless he was instructed, guided by something unseen, shaping wood into a symbol of what had already claimed him. A mask, after all, is not meant to be admired. It is meant to be worn. Masks matter more than you realize. Every institution wears one. A smiling mask of progress, of democracy, of prosperity. But behind the mask, what? The same rings carved into bark. The same whispers carried through corridors of influence. Consider how control works. It doesn't come through brute force, not anymore. It comes through ceremony. You vote. You sign contracts. You click, "I agree." Each step feels voluntary, but the choice has already been made for you. Just like the loggers in 1855 who thought they were swinging axes for wages, not chanting in a ritual. This is the psychological brilliance of power, to make men complicit without their awareness. The forest taught its chosen how to mask devouring as opportunity, and those men carried that technique out into the world. That is why today you submit with a smile. That is why you sacrifice without seeing the altar. Because the mask has convinced you there is no altar at all. What if I told you that the very way you dream at night may not be entirely yours? Reports from descendants of the survivors mention recurring visions, spirals of bark, roots weaving into cities, a hollow cedar mouth breathing. These are not just nightmares. They are transmissions. Seeds planted in the bloodlines of the chosen, sprouting as imagery in unconscious minds. And here's the chilling part. Those same images appear in the dreams of people who never even heard the story of the logging camp. Artists paint spirals without knowing why. Writers describe living forests that feed. Children draw circles with roots extending outward. The forest is not confined to a patch of Michigan land. It has become viral, infecting imagination itself. Do you see what that means? The control system is not only outside you. It is inside. Inherited. Dream. Whispered from the unconscious. Which means the hollow cedar may not be watching you from the woods. It may be watching you through your own reflection. Now, the greatest trick of power is convincing you it does not exist. You think of politicians as greedy, corporations as corrupt, institutions as inefficient. That's the surface mask. But beneath? There is coordination, precision, ritual. The forest did not grow haphazardly. It spread through deliberate sacrifice, one man at a time. Modern power is no different. Why do you think wealth always concentrates upward, no matter the decade, no matter the policies? Why do crises always end with ordinary people feeding the machine, while the elite thrive untouched? This is not incompetence. It is ritualized harvesting. Men enter the system believing they will prosper by work, by faith, by loyalty. But just like the loggers, they are consumed. Their hours, their health, their years are swallowed. And a chosen few, descendants of the pact, emerge rewarded, untouchable, untouchably loyal. That is not economics. That is priesthood. A living sacrifice disguised as a paycheck. If you've stayed with me this far, then you feel it, the weight pressing down, the awareness that what you were taught was history was in fact initiation. You have been living inside a ritual you did not consent to. But here's the dangerous knowledge. Once you see the ritual, you are no longer prey. You become something else. That's why those who escaped the forest weren't broken. They were transformed. They learned to wear masks. They learned to harvest others instead of being harvested. You must decide which role you play now. Do you walk into the cedar mouth blind, or do you step into the clearing with eyes open? Before we go further, I need you to anchor yourself. Comment again right now the phrase I gave you earlier: the forest remembers, twice. Not for me, for you. It is your declaration that you will no longer be blind, no longer erased. Because from here on, the descent becomes sharper, the revelations heavier. And if you're still here, you're ready for what's next. Patterns don't vanish, they expand. After the 10 men were scattered across Michigan's towns and councils, documents show their names quietly appear in wartime supply contracts. Strange shipments of timber, always unaccounted for, always marked with that same concentric ring symbol, moved east during the Civil War. But here's the twist: those crates weren't going to battlefronts. They were redirected to secret warehouses near Washington, D.C. And in 1864, a senator from Michigan, whose campaign was mysteriously funded by timber barons, pushed legislation that reshaped land ownership across the North. Forests were parceled, sold, and guarded, as if the government itself had joined the pact. Ask yourself, why would a republic at war devote resources to hidden shipments of bleeding wood? Unless they knew what it carried. Unless they knew what it carried. Unless they wanted the infection to spread from frontier wilderness into the very veins of the capital. The infection deepened. Survivors' descendants began showing up in strange brotherhoods, Masonic lodges, banking circles, industrial councils. But their rituals shifted slightly. Standard oaths were altered. Instead of compasses and squares, their symbols carried spirals. Instead of prayers to God, whispers to the Hollow One. Imagine it: respected judges, bankers, and lawmakers bowing not to divine law but to something rooted in the soil, a cathedral of flesh disguised as wood. And yet they wore the same mask as always. Outwardly they were patriots, family men, pillars of community. Inwardly they were gardeners for something non-human. It was not a cult of dozens. It became a cult of hundreds, then thousands, as influence cascaded down bloodlines. And here is the brutal truth: this cult is not dead. It's not even underground. It thrives in daylight, its ceremonies disguised as board meetings, its oaths disguised as contracts, its offerings disguised as policy. Wars are perfect for feeding. Men thrown into forests, jungles, mountains, isolated, terrified, primed for sacrifice. The hollow cedar does not care about flags. It only cares about harvest. In World War I, units stationed in wooded French battlefields reported phantom forests, stands of trees that appeared where none had been, shadows moving between trunks even under artillery fire. A soldier's diary describes walking into a mist and hearing the sound of axes, though no men swung them. His body was never recovered. In World War II, strange reports surfaced again. Entire platoons missing in the Ardennes. Villages depopulated without struggle. Locals spoke of a hunger of the trees. And afterward? Timber companies connected to the same bloodlines gained enormous contracts to rebuild Europe. The cycle repeats: war, harvest, profit. You see it now, don't you? The battlefield is not for victory. It is for feeding the same cathedral that began with 110 men in 1855. Now you must face the psychological dimension, the way the forest logic has been replicated in your own society. Remember how the loggers thought they were earning wages, not performing sacrifices? Today you think you're living freely, but every choice is framed by invisible roots. Work long hours, drain your body, submit to endless debt. Always told it is your choice, though the outcome is predetermined. Every exhausted soul becomes an offering. Every life cut short by stress, every spirit broken by routine, is consumed by the same system. It is the forest, reborn as industry. The altar is not cedar roots now, it is glass towers, glowing screens, political chambers. You live inside it, and the more you labor, the stronger it grows. Do you feel it? That sense that your very energy is harvested while the powerful grow impossibly wealthy, impossibly untouchable? That's not incompetence. That's not coincidence. That's ritual. You are standing in the forest right now. The mask tells you that governments protect you, that corporations serve you, that leaders represent you. But peel it back and you see the same old rings burned into bark. Power doesn't represent you. It feeds on you. Just as the loggers were never meant to return whole, you were never meant to escape the cycle intact. The few who are chosen, who are elevated, who inherit positions of ease, they are the new survivors. The rest of us are the missing 100, swallowed without graves, without screams, without records. And when you understand that, something in you changes. Fear transforms into clarity. Because once you see the ritual, you can begin to resist it. And that is why this knowledge has been buried for over a century. That is why you were never told about 1855. Because if you knew the truth, you would stop feeding the altar. And without your offerings, the forest stars think about the role of stories. For tribes, myths were warnings. For the loggers, whispered tales were the only defense against the unknown. And for you, stories are control mechanisms. The forest taught its chosen the value of narrative, that men who believe a lie will build their own prison. That's why every institution today spends fortunes on shaping your story. Media doesn't just inform, it encodes. It repeats the same cycles: fear, outrage, relief. Fear, outrage, relief. This rhythm drains your energy the way the cedar mouth drained loggers' bodies. Every broadcast is another axe swung, every headline another offering. And the people writing these scripts? Many trace their bloodlines back to those same families, the ones who walked out of the woods marked but alive. You think you're watching the news. You're sitting in a clearing, listening to the whispers of the hollow cedar disguised as anchors and analysts. And without realizing it, you're chanting along. Psychology itself was shaped by this infection. In the early 20th century, one of Freud's protégés wrote of archetypes of devouring woods, claiming that human minds carry collective memories of being consumed by forests. The paper was buried. Why? Because the cult of the survivors knew too much truth had leaked. Instead, psychology turned toward making you adapt, be more productive, fit the system, survive in industry. Therapy wasn't built to free you, it was built to make you function as a better offering. Depression? Treat it enough so you can keep working. Anxiety? Calm it enough so you can keep producing. Trauma? Reframe it enough so you remain loyal to the altar. Think about it, your suffering isn't healed. It's managed. Why? Because the harvest must continue. The forest's logic rules psychology. Reshape the broken, discard the hopeless, reward the chosen. Always feeding, never ending. Religion was not immune. In fact, it became one of the hollow cedar's sharpest masks. Churches near the blind zone were strangely well-funded, their pastors quietly connected to logging wealth. Sermons began weaving forest imagery into doctrine, the tree of life, the vine and the branches. But beneath the surface, something older spoke. One diary from a preacher in 1889 records a horrifying confession. The forest prays through us. We do not preach salvation, we extend roots. The men kneel, and in their prayers they are consumed. Imagine it. A religion within a religion, hijacking devotion, turning worship into nourishment for something hidden. Is it any wonder that today institutions of faith often protect wealth, demand obedience, and silence dissent? The hollow cedar doesn't care what name you give it. It only cares that you kneel. It only cares that your devotion strengthens the mask and blinds you to the devouring. Surveillance is the forest reborn in steel and glass. Where once whispers carried through trees, now algorithms watch through screens. Every search, every post, every private message is cataloged. And what do you think that data is really? It is nourishment. Your fears, your desires, your impulses, they are harvested, analyzed, fed upward into the machine. You are logged the way the 1855 men logged cedar. You are counted, sorted, consumed. And the watchers? They don't even need to drag you into the woods. They've rebuilt the woods around you, invisible and omnipresent. You walk through branches of code every day, your movements mapped like footsteps in the clearing. You think you hold the phone, but the phone holds you. The forest remembers, and now it watches not through trees, but through the glass you carry in your pocket. But the sharpest twist is this: the forest does not kill its chosen. It elevates them. Just as those 10 survivors became leaders, today's chosen rise effortlessly. They are the influencers who never struggle, the billionaires who never fall, the politicians who always escape scandal. You see them, don't you? People whose lives move as if guided by invisible hands. That's no accident. That's inheritance. They have been marked, their families tied to the pact, their power fertilized by the harvest of others. And every time you wonder why life favors the few, remember 1855. Remember the 10 who walked out when 100 never returned. That ratio has never changed. 1 in 10 serve. 9 in 10 are consumed. This is not economics. It is ritual mathematics. The spiral repeats across generations, and unless you see it, you are standing in line for the altar thinking you are free. Do you know why spirals recur in sacred architecture, in corporate logos, in political emblems? It is not design. It is inheritance. The spiral is the cedar mouth. The spiral is the consuming loop, the promise of eternity through devouring. The loggers saw it burned into bark before the first man vanished. You see it glowing on the billboards you pass daily, the brands you trust, the institutions you revere. You thought it was art. It is marking. It is the forest reaching out, whispering through design the same way it whispered through symbols carved in wood. And every time you wear it, buy it, display it, you mark yourself. You participate in the chant. You kneel before the altar, thinking you are only consuming, never realizing you are being consumed. Education was another mask. Schools teach you obedience cloaked as knowledge. Bells ring, bodies file in rows, voices recite approved words. Does it sound familiar? It should. That was the rhythm of the logging camp. Wake at dawn, swing the axe, sing the work songs, kneel in the clearing. The system trains you from childhood to offer your hours, your thoughts, your very creativity to the altar. By the time you leave school, you are already shaped, ready to serve, unable to see the spiral that grips your life. And here's the unspoken truth. Many of America's earliest school boards were chaired by the descendants of those survivors. Coincidence? Or inheritance? They learned from the hollow cedar how to shape men quietly, invisibly, molding them from children into offerings that walk willingly to the altar. Even medicine, the domain of healing, was captured. In the 19th century, local doctors near the blind zone reported strange growths. Flesh that looked like bark, tumors that hardened like knots in wood. Their notes were destroyed. Their careers ended. And yet, descendants of the survivors invested heavily in medical institutions. Hospitals rose where the forest once stood, gleaming white towers that promised salvation. But healing was never the point. Just as psychology taught you to adapt, medicine taught you to survive long enough to keep feeding. Keep working, keep producing, keep sacrificing until you are fully spent. Think about how illness is treated. Patches, suppressions, prolongations. Never the root. Never freedom. Because a man freed is a man no longer on the altar. And the forest demands you remain until every drop is consumed. Now consider entertainment. Theaters, movies, music, rituals of mass attention. Where once chants circled a cedar, now millions chant together in stadiums, glued to screens, bound by rhythm and light. The forest cathedral has gone global. You think you're watching fiction. You're watching training. Archetypes of heroes and villains, cycles of sacrifice, endless narratives of chosen ones rising while others fall. They are not just stories. They are rehearsals. They prepare your mind to accept harvest as normal, to accept hierarchy as inevitable, to accept the spiral as destiny. Entertainment doesn't distract you, it inducts you. Every song you repeat, every scene you replay, is another chant offered to the hollow cedar through modern masks. Now listen carefully. The forest never needed to remain physical. Once it infected minds, once it encoded itself into institutions, the soil no longer mattered. That is why you can live in a city of concrete and steel and still feel the spiral pressing down on you. The cedar mouth is no longer in one clearing, it is everywhere. Every office, every courtroom, every school, every broadcast. You live inside the forest now. And those who resist, they vanish, not always into trees but into silence. Careers ended, reputations erased, voices drowned in noise. Do you see it? Vanishing doesn't require bark. It requires erasure. That was the lesson of 1855. And it is still the ritual now. The most dangerous truth is this. The forest never needed to remain in Michigan. It was never bound to geography, it was bound to psychology. Once men carried its oath beyond the trees, It spread into cities, governments, nations. Look around you. Do you think it's coincidence that wealth always ascends in spirals no matter the system? That empires rise and collapse in repeating cycles, feeding a hidden order behind the mask of history? The hollow cedar taught its servants well: hide the altar inside the system itself. Let men believe they are free, let them believe they chose their path, while all the while their energy, their lifeblood, their very creativity is siphoned upward. The spiral repeats in Wall Street, in Congress, in the Pentagon, in Hollywood. And each ring of power consumes the ring beneath it, until only the few, the marked, stand untouched at the center. That center is not human. It never was. Think about what you've heard so far. 110 men walked into a forest. Only 10 returned. Those 10 became vessels, their descendants rising into institutions. The infection spread into war, media, psychology, religion, medicine, education, entertainment. And now, it sits in your pocket, glowing, watching, whispering. Do you understand? The spiral is complete. What was once a cathedral of bark and roots is now a cathedral of data and screens. The cedar mouth has become invisible, omnipresent, carried into every home. And here is the darkest twist: you carry it willingly. You feed it your fears, your desires, your attention. You kneel without kneeling, you chant without speaking, you offer sacrifice without ever walking into the woods. That is the perfection of the ritual. You are both logger and offering, both worker and sacrifice. The forest doesn't need to devour your body anymore. It devours your mind. And it devours it with your consent. But here's the forbidden secret they fear: the spiral can be broken. Not by governments, not by revolutions, not by violence. Those have all been absorbed into the altar before. The only way out is awareness. To see the mask, to see the ritual, to step out of the rhythm. That is why this story was erased, why you were never meant to hear it. Because once you recognize the cedar mouth staring back at you through politics, through media, through faith, through your own reflection, you are no longer prey. You are no longer harvested without awareness. That alone changes everything. Power thrives in blindness. But the moment a single man sees, the ritual cracks. That's why the survivors weren't broken. They were elevated. They saw. They chose to serve rather than vanish. Now you are offered the same choice. Will you see and resist, or will you see and kneel? Before I tell you the final truth, I must ask something. You followed me through the forgotten forest, through the vanished men, through the spiral's infection of every institution in your life. You felt the weight of what was hidden from you. Now I want you to do one thing. Subscribe to this channel, not as another click, but as a declaration. Because this is not just entertainment. This is initiation. And when you subscribe, you align yourself with others who see through the mask. Together we form a circle of our own, not for feeding but for awakening. The forest remembers, but so do we. And if enough of us remember, if enough of us stare into the cedar mouth and refuse to kneel, then the altar cracks. The system withers. The spiral breaks. That is the one thing they cannot allow. That is why this story was buried. That is why you must carry it forward. And now the last revelation. The forest was never just in Michigan. It was never just in 1855. It has always been here, in every empire, every age, every system of control. The hollow cedar is the shape of power itself, devouring, spiraling, feeding on the many to elevate the few. But here's what they never expected: that one day the offerings would see the altar for what it is. That one day the chant would break. You have heard the story now. You cannot unknow it. And so you face the same choice as those loggers did in the frozen silence of 1855. Will you vanish, consumed in blindness? Or will you survive, changed, marked, awake? Write it again in the comments twice to seal your choice. The forest remembers. For once you speak it, you cannot return to sleep. You will walk out of the clearing alive, aware, transformed. And you will never look at the world the same way again.